Each other for 22 years. We got to Rice University together in '02, and Stephen was a student of mine back then, had a different doctoral advisor. Ted Peters, who is above me, the God above me. I don't know Ted, but I know his work, and I'm happy you're here, Ted. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you for this invitation. It's good to see you.
I'm not sure what he said, but there we go.
Can you hear me? Let me test alphabetic lambda delta. Can you hear me?
Okay. We still can't, you can't hear him either?
Right, the keep testing alpha, beta. Can you hear me? No, I'm not muted.
So we're working on it. So.
Oh, it's...
Okay, we'll keep going. Okay, so let's start. I guess what I really want to do with Stephen and Ted is talk about religion, which is a really bad word. If you want to kill a conversation, just use the word religion. If you don't want anybody to talk to you on a plane, just say you're a professor of religion. They'll shut up real quick. That'll be it. But I want to draw this distinction between institutional religion and religious experience. And I also know that for Professor Peters, he's written a lot about the hermeneutic of secular experience and how there are religious impulses or sacred experiences that are encoded or camouflaged in experiences like UFO events. And I guess I want to begin by just asking Stephen and Ted to just talk a bit about that and how they understand that distinction and whether that's fair, Ted, to your work. This notion of the hermeneutic of secular experience. So let's start with Stephen, and then we'll go to.
Sure. And first, we want to talk about religion and the distinction between.
Yeah.
All right. So in religious studies, as you know, there's this saying: if you ask 100 scholars to define religion, you'll get 100 different answers.
Right.
And but I think what I mean when I say religion, I'm already not talking about gods and institutions. I'm mostly talking about meaning-making practices, or what Charles Long calls orientation. Charles Long from the Chicago School. And so those things that people do to make their world coherent, such that they're able to locate themselves in the ultimate sense. So for me, religion already isn't about institutions or gods or creeds so much as it's about these meaning-making practices. Popularly, people talk about religion in institutional terms, though, and I totally get that, which is different from religious experience. But for me, it's already not institutional. To me, the institutional developments are secondary and tertiary developments of how I want to understand religion at its core.
Let's go on
Sure.
and talk about science fiction and religion. And the notion of science fiction as it relates to colonialism and as it relates to race and religion, and this sort of the broad way that a lot of the UFO or UAP stuff is absorbed in the culture through science fiction, and kind of the colonial and background to that material.
That's a big question. I come at this conversation already through religious studies and black studies. But even in religious studies, as you probably know, I argue when we talk about religion, we're already talking about race. Right. Religion itself is a concept that comes to us through colonial realities. and imperialism, and many people actually don't know that. And so I try to push the discipline to embrace that, and then ask the question, what does the study of religion look like when we do religion or study religion, taking ownership of its colonial origins? What does that look like? And so with respect to the UAP, or in the traditions I study in African American religion, they use the term UFOs, it's clear that there's a relationship between race, colonialism, Black experience, and how they understand UFOs. Often UFOs are meant to give them a sense of transcendence when their experience through racial terror, 400 years in the United States, treated them only as bodies or as eminence. And of course, this finds its way into popular culture, in music and literature. I'm thinking of George Clinton. Some of you know the group Parliament, Funkadelic. George Clinton's really famous album in the 70s, Parliament, called Mothership Connections, Star Child, that included the song Unfunky UFO. And so there are ways, even in African American culture, where the UFO narrative finds its way into popular culture, and including music, but also fiction. I was talking earlier this morning about British fiction and H.G. Wells, and you and I were just talking about that a little while ago, and how War of the Worlds is itself a critique of British colonialism. And so those are two examples right there of how the UAP phenomena or UFOs find their way into popular culture and literature and music.
I guess what I want to also get at is, the experience of the UFO or the UAP is really different depending on the culture you're talking about or the community. And your work in particular, Stephen, is a real example of that for me. And so maybe you can speak to that, and then we can see if Professor Peters as well can speak to this notion of these different ways that the UFO or the UAP is not just reported, not just interpreted, but I think it's an actual, the interpretation is part of the experience or part of the event.
Yeah, I think I understand the question, and if I'm not, maybe you can nudge me. But in the groups that I study, including the Nation of Islam, Prophet Yahweh, the UFO twins, and all these African American UFO communities, which is probably a distinct UFO phenomena in the United States, which is at least as early as the one that most people talk about. For them, the encounter of UFOs is something that gives them respite, like I said before, and transcendence from the history of racial terror in the United States. But one of the distinctions is, even though the UFO is a universal phenomenon occurring across time and across geographies, these Black traditions see the UFO as a distinctly Black experience. Right? So it's not a universal experience. The inhabitants of UFOs are Black, which means different things. It doesn't necessarily mean Black the way we might understand it in the United States. Sometimes it does, but sometimes it's much more expansive than that. And so these UFOs give them a sense of being and a way to engage the world that often has not offered them the complex subjectivity that we heard spoken of in another panel today. And so when these groups and individuals talk about UFOs, they're talking about something familiar, an encounter with something that was lost, perhaps through the slave trade, right? Which we could understand also as a UFO abduction. And sort of a reuniting with that which is familiar. So you don't find these experiences that are violent or that are scary. They don't even use the term abduction in these traditions for that reason. But these are experiences and interpretations that are familiar, that reconnect Black communities, sometimes to their African heritage. When George Clinton and Bootsy Collins talked about their UFO experience, they automatically start making connections with the Dogons of Mali and their stargazing. Others will make reference to, like Sun Ra, to North Africa and Egypt and so on. So it's an experience that gives these African American folks who talk about them and who could be understood as experiencers a sense of fullness that I think escapes them in the world the way it's presently constituted.
So the notion of fear, the notion of abduction is culturally constructed in some ways.
Correct.
Yeah. Professor Peters, let's see if we have our voice back, our sound back. Can you speak to the nature of the UFO experience, the different models that you have for it? No, we don't have him. Okay. All right. Well, let's go on then.
All right. I guess we have to.
Let's. We don't have to do anything. Actually, we could.
All right.
Oh, there he is.
All right.
He's
Okay.
back. Okay.
All right.
Tell me when I can speak.
Okay. Okay. Good. All right. Good.
I'm not hearing Jeffrey,
All right, Professor Peters. What
but Jeffrey's talking.
we were asking is what were the different
Yeah.
models of the UFO or
I
the?
should be hearing Jeffrey. Is that right, Justin?
He says
Jeffrey, are you
he says he
talking?
thinks he's hearing you.
No.
So we still don't have it.
Right.
Okay. All right. So we still don't have Professor Peters. Is that what we're saying?
Sounds like it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go then back to the black experience.
Are we ready? Stand by.
Or we could sing along.
I can't see him. You can see him.
Yeah, I can see him.
Well, thank you for the lead, Stephen.
He's talking to me, but I don't know what he's saying.
Okay. Thank you
Well,
for that.
I'm so sorry to have missed what Stephen was just saying there. I enjoyed his account of Louis Farrakhan's UFO experience with the mother
The mother wheel.
Of course, it's cannot hear me. Is that right?
I'm not exactly
still-
sure what he's saying, but what it sounds like he's saying, he's asking me about Louis Farrakhan's mother wheel experience. So with respect to the Nation of Islam, let me say what I think he's asking me about. The prophet of the Nation of Islam dies in February 1975. That's Elijah Muhammad. The group, the Nation of Islam, splits into a lot of different groups, many of them claiming to be the legitimate heir to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. Minister Farrakhan doesn't initially become the leader of the group. He's outmaneuvered in some ways by Elijah Muhammad's son, Wallace Muhammad, who later changed his name to Warith Muhammad. And so for 2 years, from 1975 to 1977, he participates in the Nation of Islam under the leadership of Wallace Muhammad. Around 1977, close to 1978, Minister Farrakhan has a private conversation with an actor by the name of Brock Peters. And he tells Brock Peters that he's considering reconstituting the Nation of Islam. That's the language that he uses. That Wallace Muhammad, the son of Elijah Muhammad, in many ways has corrupted his teachings, the teachings of his father, Elijah Muhammad. So Farrakhan leaves. Now he says it felt like he was excommunicated, and that's probably closer to the truth. But in 1977, going into 1978, he reconstitutes the Nation of Islam, which is mostly new members and a remnant from the old Nation of Islam. But there's all these issues out here about who the rightful leader is. Elijah Muhammad's brother starts a Nation of Islam. His name is John Muhammad. Silas Muhammad starts a more conservative group called the Nation of Islam. And so all these groups claim to be the legitimate heir to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad. So what happens? September 17th, 1985, Minister Farrakhan goes to Mexico, which they do quite often. They make these esoteric, New Age type treks to Mexico and Sedona, Arizona, and they climb the ruins of Quetzalcoatl. And so on September 17th, 1985, he claims to have had this vision of this mother wheel, and that's what Ted is asking us about. This vehicle that Elijah Muhammad had always taught the Nation of Islam members as sort of a secret knowledge that would bring the end of the age of white domination and black suffering. So Farrakhan is there with some friends, including his wife and some others, there at Tepozteco Mountain in Tepoztlan, Mexico. And he says he sees this vehicle come over the mountain, but doesn't land. And he felt fearful. And all of a sudden he hears this voice coming from it, because he looked around to see where his companions were, and he hears this voice that says, "Not them, just you." So he says that he was taken up in a vision into this vehicle, which wasn't a vision in the sense of a dream, something much more like an astral projection or a near-death experience, where he heard the voice and felt the presence of Elijah Muhammad, who had died 10 years earlier in 1975, and Master Fard Muhammad, the founder of the Nation of Islam, in 1930. And then he said he received two prophecies from that. And I won't go into that, except to say there were prophecies about Reagan and the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the war on drugs and things that look like they actually happened in the 80s. The point I'm making, what I hope Ted is asking, that I'm answering, is that this is the experience that initiated Minister Farrakhan as sort of a sage and prophet. And to this day, he sees himself as an equivalent of Jesus and Muhammad and Abraham and so on. But it also initiated him in the sense that it gave him his mission and his calling, which ultimately was sort of a freedom from racism and injustice in a colonial sense, not just for black people, but for all colonized people. The second thing that I think I want to say real quickly before we see if Ted can speak is that Minister Farrakhan was a product of a relationship between his mother and a man who was not his father. And so she said that she tried to terminate her pregnancy with him 3 times. She was hoping, failing at that he came out looking like them. They were really dark complexioned. If you know Minister Farrakhan, he's really light, so it didn't work. And so Farrakhan said that scarred him, right, all his life. It even accounts for why Wallace was able to outsmart him and outmaneuver him for the leadership of the Nation of Islam in 1975 when Elijah Muhammad died. But the other thing that this experience with the UFO did was it was kind of a new birth, right? If one understands the mother wheel in feminine terms, he imagines himself returning to the womb and being reborn as someone who was profoundly more significant than the insignificance of his birth story, right? And those are the two things that I want to share about that experience. So I offer that to say that not only is the UFO significant for many black religious communities, but it's the most important religious idea for the Nation of Islam, especially for Farrakhan and his own identity.
Okay, Ted, can you hear that?
Well, can you hear me at this juncture, I trust? It looks like you can't. Oh my goodness, because I've really got a lot I would like to contribute here to this. Are you still unable to hear me?
No, we can't hear you. We can't understand.
Well, I know what I'd like to do is go back to the hermeneutic of secular experience and say a few things about that. And then the Louis Farrakhan theophany or theophany, as Stephen has portrayed it here, and then offer some interpretations in terms of UFOs and the wider culture, if I might do that. I think started to say earlier that I grew up with a mother and father who were disciples of George Adamski and read the material and stuff like that as a kid and really enjoyed it. And then later on, as I mentioned, the University of Chicago, I studied there and came under the influence of Mircea Eliade, and I think he's a figure that the two of you like to some degree, and also the theologian Paul Tillich, who would use the history of religion for interpreting what's happening in secular Western society, and in part, I want to say that what's happened since the Enlightenment is a pulling away from religious ways of interpreting our existence, religious in the institutional sense, and substituting a new sacred. There's never the name of sacred. It's called science and technology, and many of the hopes that religious people had in our faith societies are now placed on science and technology. So if you can't believe in angels to take care of you anymore, maybe a flying saucer visiting us from space, from a civilization more highly advanced or more highly evolved, with the doctrine of progress built in there, can come and save us with a higher or more advanced technology. And in some ways, what we get in UFO experiences is a paradoxical mix of the classically religious with science and technological overlay. So in the case of the Western town, we have a classic common experience, the vision of growing up and needing having to meet. On the one hand, the mountain goes up, and on the other hand, the flying saucer representing heaven comes down, and Farrakhan is here receiving the blessing, usually in common occurred on grant, but in this case, Elijah Muhammad passes on the authority of heaven, so that Louis Farrakhan becomes the minister, so to speak, the high priest or the shaman of the nation of Islam. So it's a classic, archaic religion, but it's technologized because the mother plane or the mother wheel is here in Farrakhan's conception than it's a machine of some kind of advanced technology. So you get them mixed together, but this is the same kind of religious experience you get with pre-modern religions and archaic religions, things like that. So the real religion of modern Western society is science and technology, and it likes to, like a vacuum cleaner, just sweep up religious sensibilities, and a lot of these converge in the UFO phenomenon. Now, I don't want to reduce the UFO phenomenon to this. I just think these are structures of interpretation which have been there since 1947, but especially since the early 1950s and the contactees. And you notice that, Stephen, in your treatment of Farrakhan, which I like very much, you suggest he may be an abductee. Well, in a sense he is, but I think Farrakhan looks more like George Adamski and Thurman Bethlehem or Rael or some of the great contactees, in the sense that he brings a teaching, a gnosis, from the esoteric civilization back to Earth. So I guess what I would add to what you've said, Stephen, is he's a little bit more in continuity with the contactees of the 1950s, and less with the abductees of John Mack of the 1980s and 90s.
Well, I appreciate that observation. I didn't hear all of it, but I did hear some of your observation about science and technology and the use of those particular tropes. I'm thinking here in particular of Michael Lieb's work, Children of Ezekiel, and his idea that UFOs become, for a lot of groups, including the Nation of Islam, this attempt to technologize the ineffable. And you mentioned gnosis and so on. And so that's the first thought that comes to my mind. The other thing is, in these traditions that I study, the religious traditions that I study, that science and technology actually become really important tropes. And so in conversations that I've had with folks from some of these groups, they actually don't like that I prioritize religion as sort of a lens to make sense of these phenomena, UFOs, UAP. They actually prefer the notions of science and technology. And part of that, and I'm just speculating here, might be because of historic notions of Black intellectual inferiority that were in structural anti-Blackness and so on. And so casting these vehicles as this great scientific technology that NASA can't duplicate. Elijah Muhammad used to say the USA doesn't have any weapons that can shoot down the mother wheel, is also a different way of saying, of disrupting the notion of Black inferiority that is so structural historically in the United States. And so even in some of the groups like the Nation of Islam, to your point, they call angels scientists. That's the term that they use for them. Exactly. Yeah.
So let me ask, I think, a question that's on a lot of people's mind is, at least it's on my mind. Is something like an abduction experience or a UFO encounter, is it an experience of this colonial history and of this anti-Blackness that you're speaking about? Or is it that the filter of the human is filtering this experience through these histories? Do you understand?
I would say, I think I do, and I would say the latter. But again, we're talking about a really strict filter, because in filtering it becomes the UFO phenomena or UAP become a Black phenomena. Yeah. So
for the Black community,
for these Black religious groups, yeah, in particular. And I'll just mention some others. The United Nubian Nation of Moors. I mentioned the UFO twins, the United Nation of Islam, Kansas City, now known as Value Creators, Sun Ra, I think I mentioned, and there are a whole host of these particular religious traditions that I argue is a distinct UAP, UFO tradition.
Yeah, I think at least for some of the literature, I mean, I've read a lot of Charles Fort, and there's very much a post-colonial or a colonial hermeneutic in Fort. I mean, this notion that we are property, and the idea that the alien or the craft is somehow colonizing us is a function of the 1920s, really, when Fort's writing, but it's of course still part of our vocabulary. I mean, it's still part of people's experience as well, this notion of being property and this lack of agency in the abduction experience.
Yeah. I wonder if these African American communities aren't inverting that.
Yeah,
though.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm sure they are.
Yeah.
Professor Peters, do you want to say anything else about this notion of the secular as this place where the religious impulse is coming through?
I would like to actually extend the discussion that you two just had a little bit, picking up where Stephen left off, about the sense of empowerment. So in Farrakhan's announcement, which came 2 years after the UFO experience, he describes the African Americans as the people of God. And now there's going to be a judgment record. So we've got the apocalypse. Now, the judgment is not going to be rendered against the people of God as it was in the Old Testament. It's going to be against the judgment will be against the white population for its oppression. And that judgment will come in the form of warrior UFOs, which will have destructive power. And the government had better watch out. That's the Ronald Reagan, George Bush, the first George Bush warning going on. Well, what I want to draw out of that is the sense of empowerment. Now I'd like to try on a hypothesis that maybe some in Saul Foundation or in the audience would want to think about. And I'm going to try to answer the question, why is it that the disclosure controversy of today does not change one whit from what it looked like in 1950 when Don Kilo, Frank Scully, and others were introducing the subject of how angry they are against the U.S. government for hiding these secrets. Here's my hypothesis. We don't want the government to review those secrets. We just want the controversy to go on and on and on without resolution. Why is that? Well, I think in the American case, it has to do again with empowerment. After World War II, Americans and many other people in the world felt that the United States was the most powerful nation in the world. After all, they dropped the atomic bomb, they won wars on 2 different theaters. Wouldn't it be wonderful to think that America was blessed, not by God, but by an advanced technological civilization somewhere? Is it possible that Uncle Sam has reverse engineering the future technology? And I think there's a dream that's unacknowledged that the populist wants Washington to be the most powerful capital of the world, and it is blessed by unlimited power coming from an extraterrestrial civilization. And we don't want to know about it, even though we say we do want to know about it. We don't want to know about it because national security requires that we keep our weapons secret. And so this never-ending falterable of demanding secrets. And no matter what gets revealed, we demand more revelation. And I thought about this in 1997 at the Roswell anniversary. I see you're looking at your watch. I'll try not to speak too long. Where it was a giant barbecue, everybody with their Webers out and their trailers and kids running all over the place, and farmers and blue collars all thinking America is wonderful. So what I would like to do is suggest that there's a borrowing of extraterrestrial power that's applied in the American case to make us think that we're more powerful than we really are. And if the government were to reveal that it doesn't know anything about flying saucers, it might suggest a weakness that nobody wants to admit. Anyway, this might to provide a religious explanation for why it is that after 75 years there's no progress on disclosure.
So, Stephen, can you want to respond to any of that, and then we'll close up here.
Well, I'm not sure that I actually understood a lot of what he was saying. So let's start there. I think I heard something about disclosure and empowerment. And with regard to empowerment, I mean, I think that's what Ted was partly what he was trying to say. That's largely what I'm trying to argue and articulate with respect to the groups that interest me. That the UAP or UFOs become means of empowerment. And so I guess I guess what I'm trying to do, and part of what I see as my job, is to decolonize the study of UAP. Just like in your work, well, thank you. Just like in your work, you want to decolonize reality, I want to decolonize and expand the study of UAP, and trust that that'll be a more fruitful conversation in so doing.
All right, let's stop there and let's thank Professor Peters and Professor Finley.